I'm here today with Gary Hourigan. Gary's with the International Network of Churches, that's INC, and he's the Director of Church Planting, Health and Growth. Gary, thanks so much for giving up your time today. It's great being able to chat with you again.
Great pleasure, Tim.
Gary, I've had a lot to do with you over the years in terms of assessing church planters, and I've learned quite a bit from how you go about it. One of the things that you're very, very big on is talking about the difference between suitability and eligibility of church planters. Can you just unpack this, both the suitability and the eligibility side, and why they're both important?
Yeah, thanks, Tim. I appreciate the opportunity. I've been working with our denomination and others over a fair period of time now, particularly when it comes to the critical area of assessment in church planters. I was privileged enough to be part of Bob Logan's network at one stage, and Bob had a matrix of things that movements probably needed to get their head around if they were going to enter into what he calls a church multiplication movement. And one of the critical elements of the matrix was how you assess church planters. How do you increase the success rate of church plants? And one of the critical success factors there was how rigorous your assessment processes are. And so they had developed their own competencies to look for when it comes to a church planter. And we did, and we still do, refer to those and use those as a part of our processes. What I found along the way is I was introduced to some other talent material with an organisation by the name of Harrison Assessments, and they not only largely look at the aspect of, can a person do a job or a role, whatever that role might be, but not only can they, but how suitable are they to it? It's a bit like, how many times have you heard of people that have gone and got themselves educated in a profession but don't like it? That they might have the know-how, but they're not really suited. And so when we look at these, so what we did is we started to look at the difference between what we call suitability and eligibility. And if I was just to nutshell it, eligibility looks at, can you do the job? It looks at your competency. It looks at your education. It looks at your experience and says, yes, that person is able to do that job.
So Gary, just let me interrupt. With eligibility, is that where we also look at the character of the person and things like the referees, and to ensure that they're not disqualified under the biblical qualifications as well for leadership?
Yeah, absolutely. Eligibility would be, do they meet any requirement of a person doing that job? So definitely in our instance, it would be their character, because it's such an integral part of the development of Christians, but particularly Christian leaders. And, if I really wanted to nutshell it, I would say their character, the ministry skills that they might have. What are they like as communicators? What are they like as prayers? What are they like as people who can move with the Spirit? All of that's the whole ministry side of things. And then there's the whole competency as a leader. What's their experience as leading? Can they form teams? Can they cast vision? Can they gather resources? Can they be strategic? So that would be very nutshell. And when it comes to the overall development of a leader, I call them the 3 C's. Their character, their calling, which is their ministry side of things, and their competency as a leader. And that's the eligibility side of it.
Okay.
The other side of it.
Yeah, unpack for us now about the suitability. What do you mean by the suitability?
So suitability is, again, eligibility says, can you do a job? Suitability looks at, will you do a job? And so it says, well, how suitable are you for any particular role? Talent organizations use it all the time to measure a person. A student might look at an assessment like this to help them decide what is a range of careers that they may consider as they go forward, because they're suited for them. One of the underlying theories behind suitability is called enjoyment performance theory. Yes. And it says that a person is most likely to succeed at something when they enjoy doing it. So it's not just can they do it, is that they actually enjoy doing it. In fact, independent research says that a person is 3 times more likely to succeed in any role when they enjoy at least 70% of what they're doing.
Yep.
So it says, here's the way I'm wired. And the assessment we use is called a Harrison assessment. It measures 175 traits of a person, if you can believe that. Like, there's so many of them. But it's governed towards what are the things you're most likely to enjoy. And then when we look at a role, be it a church planting role, be it a senior pastor role, be it a youth pastor role, it says, now, what are the behaviors that to succeed in that role, you're going to have to do a lot of the times. Yep. And it looks at how suited you are to those behaviors, irrespective of how well you might do them. Yep. And so we now look at both sides of the coin. The good news about suitability is I can determine it really quickly by doing a Harrison assessment, which is just an online assessment that measures these traits. And we might have a candidate for any role, but in this case, church planting. And very early on in the piece, we can say, yeah, that person is really well suited for that. And then we can continue to develop the competency or the eligibility, knowing that they may well be well suited for that path. I hope that explains it.
Well, yes, it does. So the Harrison's report for a church planter, I've seen it, of course. I've been through the reports with you at different times, but it's about, from memory, about 53 pages of reports that you actually get. So what it effectively does, it mines a person to see what the character traits are, but then also compares those traits to the traits that are deemed to be necessary for a successful church planter. How did they determine what those success traits might be?
Yeah, well, that is where, again, Harrison is the organisation that have worked with this material for decades. They're a secular organisation. What we've been able to do is work with them to bring a lot of ministry roles, including church planting, into their technology. But what we did is we went back and we looked at a lot of the research that Bob Logan and his team had done. Dr. Charles Ridley, who's an organisational psychologist, and Bob Logan, and they had established what these essential competencies of a church planter might be. They've actually rationalised them down to 13, but when they started, they had 48 characteristics, if you like, of a church planter, which, if you're going to try and assess that, it's a bit of a minefield. But what we were able to do was partner with the Harrison organisation and take all that research data that said this is what makes a successful church planter based on what we know of successful church planters. And we said, here's the things that will help them be successful. Then we were able to import that into Harrison's technology. And so I guess in answering your question, Tim, is when we look at what we call the suitability side of that Harrison assessment, we've said, here are traits that are common to high performers as church planters. And here are traits that are common to moderate performers as church planters. Yes. And here are traits that are common to people who don't do very well. And by having a look at all that and comparing it to an individual's wiring, we're able to predict a level of suitability. Nobody's 100% suitable for anything, but we're able to get an overview, and then we're able to also identify particular traits or the absence thereof that may hinder them, and actually put them on a coaching path to manage those so that we can eliminate as many hindrances or potential hindrances as possible.
Yeah, no, that's great. And just for coaching, I think, is absolutely essential. But can you unpack for me a little bit more about how this assessment process features in the ongoing coaching for a church planter?
Yeah, well, Tim, coaching is, funnily enough, when I talked about the 13 aspects of Bob Logan's matrix, coaching was another one. Assessing was one, training was one, coaching was one. There was 10 of them. But to me, without coaching, coaching is helping a person go where God wants them to go and to walk beside them to make it happen. What the assessments do, doesn't matter what sort of assessment, Harrison assessment, a behavioural assessment, a 360, all they do is tell you where you are. They don't help you progress to where you want to be.
That's
And I
great.
think one of the essential elements that a coach brings to the table is it'll help you get clarity on what you're strong at and what you're not, but then walk with you through the change that's required to wherever you want to go. And you know, I'm a coach as well. I train coaches as well, because I just believe it's invaluable. There's lots of pastors, planters that I've coached, and it just helps them stay on track.
Yeah, that's great.
Encourages them
Yeah.
when they're feeling down. It challenges them when they want to walk away, and it helps them reframe and learn in the long term.
So let's look at a practical example of this. If, for example, the Harrison's assessment comes out and says that the person who's being assessed is not particularly strong at confronting issues, and they'd rather avoid conflict, how will coaching actually help with that?
Well, number one, it will help them identify why they tend to avoid conflict.
Yes.
It'll help them understand the ramifications of avoiding conflict, but then it will help them reframe what conflict's about and help them develop strategies to address conflict that will work for them. It's not so much prescriptive, but you know, I'm very much a believer in what I call just-in-time conflict. So when I'm coaching someone, I'm looking, just-in-time learning. I'm sorry. So if somebody I wait for a conflict situation or a potential conflict situation, and then we strategize how we might work through that.
Yeah, I think I recall in a book written many years ago by Carl George, he talked about just-in-time learning, and he used the example of putting on a parachute and being taught how to use a parachute. And if it was in a classroom, the situation might be fairly academic, but if you're in the fuselage of that plane coming towards the door, my goodness, you'll take it in very, very quickly, and it becomes very real. So that's
absolutely.
Certainly
and look, you know, I'm all for education. There's no doubt about it. But I think, and particularly an adult, is most apt to learn new things when they have to.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's great. Tell us about a sense of call. You think that a sense of call to church planting is important, and how might this come about?
Look, Tim, in all of the assessing that I might do, suitability or eligibility, whatever I'm assessing, because we still measure very much eligibility. But every time I do this, I'm very careful to say to people that I will never question the call of God on their life. I mean, you and I both know, hey, there's going to come a day when you're in a ministry role, for one reason only, you know God put you there. In fact, if you haven't got a sense of call, don't go there. That would be my biggest and probably best counsel I could give somebody. A sense of call is paramount. You know, one of my favorite passages is in Acts 20:24, where Paul says, none of these things move me. Yeah. Nor do I count my life dear to myself, that I may finish my race with joy and the ministry which I received from the Lord Jesus Christ to testify to the gospel of the grace of God. I mean, that's a key verse for me. Paul knew that he had a race to run because he received it from the Lord Jesus Christ. And there's got to be, you asked the question, how might one receive it? I think there's got to be a direct sense from God. There's got to be that there somewhere. I think that having men and women of faith with somewhat of an apostolic and prophetic gift that can actually confirm that, I don't think they shouldn't be the ones that produce that. They should be the ones that actually affirm, confirm, speak over, foster. But I think that must come. That's a you and God thing. Where I come in is to help people find the best way to work that call out. And, you know, back in our days in our movement, we were pretty well known for it. There was only one way to work a call of God out, and that was pastor or plant a church. That was it. And so we didn't worry about suitability. You had a call, that's what you did. I think we've learned that that hasn't always been successful. So suitability says, what would you most likely to be to succeed at? Would it be church planting? Would it be pastoring a church of a varying size? Would it be a location pastor of a church? Would it be a support pastor? But to help you figure out what's the best way to work that call out. But I will never question the call, because I think it's number one, essential, and number two, a very personal thing.
Yeah, no, that's good. Actually, just in terms of the call, I recall one situation where we were doing the Harrison's assessment with some church or prospective church planters. They felt certain that they had a call, and but we then found out that they actually weren't wired to be able to plant a church. But that didn't negate the call. We actually found that they found a really, really good place on a church plant team under someone else's leadership, where they were absolutely able to thrive. And so I think having a sense of call, but then also working out what that call looks like is absolutely critical. By the way,
and that is a classic example, Tim, because what happens if we don't go down that road? We put them into something that they may have felt, or someone else may have felt, that they should do, and then the success is going to be limited at best. The potential fallout of lives that are wrecked, I guess, in some way, because you've got someone in the wrong place genuinely trying to work a call of God out. And so I'm pretty passionate about doing this sort of work to help people find, well, what's the best thing for you, so that I can give you the greatest potential for success.
Yeah, that's great. By the way, Gary, you wouldn't realize this, but Acts 20:24, when I was a young church planter, I latched onto that verse as my life verse. And knowing that and being able to cling on to that through good times and hard, in particular the hard, I think is one of the things that actually kept me in the race, because there were quite a few times where without a sense of a definite sense of call, I would have been very, very challenged. You know, the question is, well, if God's called me, and if I put this down, what else do I do? I can't run from God.
Yeah. And look, it sounds like our journeys are very similar. The reason I could recite the verse is because it's been, and again, I don't say it lightly. There will come, and I don't like to be a prophet of doom, but there does come a day that you're there because you know God put you there, and you got nothing else going for you sometimes, but you know that happens, and it keeps you in the journey. You know, I also, I believe once called, always called. I do believe the gift and call of God is irrevocable. And even with this suitability and different things, when I see people looking to maybe retire, they don't really retire for a minute. The call of God, you don't retire the call of God, do you?
No.
You just find other avenues of outworking that call. So I just think we can save a lot of carnage by making sure that we're looking at a suitability and an eligibility, and then coaching to support pastors, ministers, planters along their journey, keep them in their race.
So just in terms of call, one of the things that personally I found has been absolutely invaluable, and I actually journaled on this just a couple of days ago, and that's perseverance, because trouble will come, hardship will come, and there is a real sense of when you have a sense of call of persevering, but also equally at times it is right to actually to put down a ministry. How do you balance the sense of perseverance and whether a ministry should be put down? This is putting you on the spot, this one, I know.
I think it's a big question, because I think, again, I've been a movement leader for quite a number of years, and I see quite a reluctance for people to put down a role for a lot of reasons. You know, a lot of us get our identity from what we do.
Yeah.
I think, that runs aground at some stage.
Pride and stubbornness or other reasons?
Yeah. I think other people can, out of fear, what will I do next if I put this role down? And I'm very careful to differentiate between the role and the call, because a lot of people, they restrict what a call could look like because they put it into a role. And, I look at my own life. I've pastored. I've worked for other pastors. I've been a denominational leader. All of them, if it was up to me, I'd still be pastoring the church that I was pastoring 30 years. I was never going to go away. But you've got to be open to what God might be doing next. And sometimes there's a difference between being stubborn and being persevering. And I think then we need the counsel of others.
Yeah,
it's time to move on. It's time to move into the next thing that God's got for you. But then at the same time, not just giving up because the going gets tough.
exactly.
I think I don't know what you might think about this, Tim, but because I know we have seasons of productivity and sometimes we have seasons where it doesn't look that productive. But I think a good indicator is fruit. Jesus tended to look for the fruit on the trees, didn't he? And I think, am I being as fruitful as I want to be in this role? Or is it my time to go and look at another role where I may potentially be more fruitful?
Yeah.
And,
I guess so.
I've often been tempted to maybe go in a certain direction because the going gets tough, but then I've got to look and say, well, God, where do I think you've got me right now?
Yeah. And some leaders are really gifted with a special ability to turn situations around, or to build bridges, or to reignite stagnant situations. And it's always hard yards when that happens too. And it's a different kind of fruit. So we've got to be very, very careful that the fruit that we're looking for is true kingdom fruit, and not just flashy numbers or flashy signs of success. Gary, one of the things that occurred to me quite some years ago when I was going through a sense of questioning myself, I came to realize that the call of God did not depend on a particular ministry. And I think this is what you're saying. And my example was, if I had a board meeting in, say, Sydney, I'd get in the car, I'd drive to the airport, I'd get in a plane, I'd fly up to Sydney, I'd get out of the plane, I'd get in a taxi, I'd go to the meeting, etc. And all along the way on that direction, I had different vehicles carrying me on the same direction. And I look at the call of God as being somewhat like that, in the sense that there can be different vehicles, different ministries at different times. But I'm looking at the destination, and the destination does not waver. And as you're saying, when we come to our more advanced years, it's not just a matter of becoming a grey nomad and traveling around the country, but rather it's a matter of thinking, God, how can you use me today in line with a sense of call that's there? And the vehicles may have changed.
And far too many, and we have dealt with this and are dealing with this, hopefully in a productive way now, but far too many pastors do that, whether it's their own doing or whether we fail to continue to recognise them. And how much experience are we missing out on? Like as mentors and coaches of up and coming young ministers, I just think the wisdom that we can avail ourselves to when we keep people engaged with the call of God. But the vehicle looks very different.
Yeah, absolutely. Gary, any last comments or any last thoughts that you'd like to pass on to us?
Look, probably somebody asked me a couple of years ago when I was doing some leadership work, what do I think is the most important characteristic, element of a leader's life? It was a really hard question because, there's so many things. And I was put on the spot somewhat, but something just came to me right there. It was my ability and my willingness to evaluate how I'm going all the time. If I'm willing to evaluate, I can embrace the change and continue to grow. So for me, whether it's your competencies as a planter, whether it's your growth as a leader, whether it's your walk with Jesus, always be willing to measure how you're going and then seek the counsel of coaches and mentors that'll help you journey to the next step in your race, if you like.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Gary, thanks so much for your time and your wisdom today. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Always my pleasure, Tim. You're doing a great job, and I can't wait to see what happens in this land as a result of all you're doing with you and your team.